the way the brain develops is not linear. It would be great if it just sort of chugged along and was doing its thing, and then you get to a certain age and you're all grown up. That'd be awesome, but it doesn't happen like that. What happens is it'll kind of hang around for a while and sort of Peter better, and then all of a sudden there'll be a rapid shift in development, and then it slow down again, and then a rapid shift. The two big ones that most people notice are toddlerhood, when you acquire your language and get a big boost in autonomy, and the terrible 2s, and then there are the terrible 12s, as I call them. So adolescence is another period very much like toddlerhood. And during those times, there's a whole bunch of growth in the brain and a whole big change in behavior and in the way we think about people. So it's not surprising when everything is changing and everything's in flux that you might be at increased risk or increased vulnerability for certain types of ailments. But whenever you think about the onset of a disease, particularly if it has a developmental component, what you really, really need to think hard about is how many different factors go into that disease showing up. So you have pre-programmed biology, which is genetics. You know, what are you born with? What risk factors are you born with? You have early experience. You have exposure to environmental toxins. You have potential drug abuse. You have situational variables, the home you grow up in, the friendships you have. So it really is a different disease for every individual, which is one of the things that makes mental health such a hard thing to study, but also such an important thing to study, because with enough science, we actually can start to better understand how all of these factors intermingle, and in doing that, hopefully cut some of this stuff off at the pass. There are a lot of people who think teens are by nature moody, which is not necessarily true. There are a lot of parents who think their children are depressed because they're more interested in their peers than their parents. That's also not true. If you see someone who is sad and hopeless, regardless of context, and that's a really important piece. So if they're sad and mopey around the house, but once they go to school, everything's great, they probably are not clinically depressed. If it's pervasive, if it's interrupting their social relationships, and in adults we talk about social relationships and occupational relationships. When you're when you're working with teens, you talk about social relationships and educational relationships. So if the home's disrupted and school's disrupted, then you probably do have a problem. But adolescence itself can be stressful. It's not inherently stressful. It can be stressful. So it's a compounding factor that you do have to look closely at. The bipolar illness used to be called manic depression. And bipolar illness, bipolar, two poles, meaning that you have periods of depression and periods of something called mania. And mania, if any of you have been around someone who has had way too much sugar, or had the unfortunate experience of being around someone who's using amphetamines, abusing amphetamines, you can have a sense of what mania is a little bit like. Their thoughts are very rapid and very expansive. They talk very quickly. They move very quickly. They usually have found great truth about something that doesn't really make a lot of sense. And generally, you cannot keep up with them. The other little interesting tidbit about bipolar folks that's interesting is there's that, and this is true with schizophrenia as well. Here's another myth. We'll play Mythbusters as well today. That madness and genius and creativity are all sort of the same thing, kind of somehow. Not true. Completely not true. Being schizophrenic or having bipolar illness does not make you a better mathematician or a better artist or any of that. But consistently, first-degree relatives of bipolar folks are found to be more creative. First-degree relatives, so daughters, sons, parents, brothers and sisters, 1 degree away, are on average more creative. That doesn't mean if you have a brother that's bipolar, you should definitely go to art school. That's not what that means. It just means that if you had a big group of people and did a test of creativity with them, on average, they would score higher on creativity than a group of relatives of simply depressed people or schizophrenic people. So there is that kind of loose connection there, but it is not, when you take the takeaway from this is that madness and genius, no such thing. Creativity and craziness, no such thing. The pharmacology of adolescence is very tricky. The brain itself is changing, its receptors are changing. So putting drugs that mimic the natural chemicals of the brain, putting those into a developing brain is certainly going to change the way the brain develops. Now, the catch here is I can't tell you without qualification that that's bad. We might want to change the way that the chemicals in a particular brain are working. But the problem is we don't know exactly how that works yet. So the question, usually the way I distill the question down when someone asks me about it is, can the person function? Because if the person can function, if there's any behavioral intervention that can work effectively for the person, I would say decline medicating them. Medicate a developing brain as a last resort. Because while we don't know the effects, long-term effects of medicating a brain, we do know the long-term effects of disrupting the social development of an adolescent. And those are lifelong disruptions. So if someone is not able to function, not able to go to school, not able to have friendships, not able to have relationships, that will disrupt the way their brain grows. The brain grows based on experience and based on a sort of a pre-programmed biological plan that has a lot to do with genetics. But without experience, the brain will not grow. So if your illness is preventing you from interacting with others and from leading a quasi-normal life, then medication actually might be a better choice. But I think we still have a lot to learn.